started feeling sick during class last week, and just about like 8 or 8:30, all of a sudden it hit me, and then yeah, and I felt it, and I didn't feel it when I came in, so that's why I said it was probably Mike, but I don't think I could have caught it that fast, but no, I just felt like I had a head cold, and I just kind of took it easy, but I didn't have a lot of energy, but nothing that bad.
All of a sudden,
Yeah. Yeah. It was yeah, I just used NyQuil at night and Sudafed during the day,
Ask him what he gets tests.
and then
now.
a little Afrin, and that's it. Got through it. But it's not fun having a cold during the summer. I mean, you're like, you feel you don't want to go out. You don't even want to get fresh air because it's so dang hot. Yeah. Interesting. Why? Oh, since you started being careful of people.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I don't
I
know.
also used to get a cold during finals when I was at CSUN. Every year.
Well, that's stress. That's stress and study related anxiety. Well, hopefully, so last night we went out to we had Eat for TBA at Islands. So we went to Islands and had some burgers, veggie burgers. It was good. I thought it was good. And then some people went to Yogurtland, but I'm not a big yogurt person, so we didn't do Yogurtland. But I think we had a good turnout. And next month, I mean, a couple weeks, we're doing California Fish Grill, which I don't even think there's anything for me to eat there, but I don't care. I mean, it doesn't have to be places I like, but almost every place I can eat something, but I don't think there's anything for me at California Fish Grill. But I guess people like it. So, well, Mary is good. Mary said it's good. So, yeah, and then we have Friday night services with Rick and Addie this week, but I'm heading out tomorrow to Boston to visit my daughter. That's my summer. It's going to be my summer kind of trip. So I'm going to be heading to Boston for a couple of days, and I will be back Monday. So we'll have class in person Tuesday and Wednesdays next week, but
You go by yourself?
yes, I'm going by myself. So no one else from the family's going. Tracy went to England and with Shira last week or two, whatever. They got back last week. Yeah. So that was her trip. And this is, I guess, going to be my trip. So pretty mellow summer overall. And like I said, hopefully that'll be the only time I get sick this summer, but you never know. When are you going?
Driving to Southern again.
And that's going to take you how many days to Illinois?
Yeah, big trip to get there. Stay there 4 days, and then usually we stop somewhere on the way home.
2 days or 3 days on the way back? 2 days?
Probably more like 4 because we stopped somewhere. Like it's last time we.
Oh, you mean for more than 1 day?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then it's going to be my birthday next week too, at the end of next weekend. I'll feel like 90. I'm hoping to get. No, I'm 56. I'm going to be 56 next week. So that's going to be my birthday next Friday night. So yeah, there you go. But that's a perfect segue to what we're going to start with, by the way. So we're up on Facebook. Welcome everybody on Facebook too. We're going to start with this. I love this text because we're actually on page 12 now. We skip ahead to page 12 and to the next Mishnah, actually. So this is the Mishnah, and you'll see the commentary on the Mishnah. But what's wonderful about this Mishnah is that it is one that's right from the Haggadah. The Haggadah literally quotes this section, and it's in part of the Haggadah that people kind of, it's in the Magid. It's when we tell the story, and it's part of the Haggadah where people read over this really fast, and they're like, "Do we have to read this part?" And the people who are very diligent and read every part will read this part, but they very rarely talk about it. And we actually get to talk about it and look at its original context here, which is here from the Mishnah. So this is the early part of the Talmud, the first part, the part that the rabbis wrote before 200, the Common Era. So this part was edited by Judah Hanasi, who's the last rabbi quoted in the Mishnah and was the editor of the Mishnah and was a descendant of Rabbi Hillel. And it was, and it was edited in the land of Israel, right? So it was edited in the area around Tiberias in the north in the Galilee after the Jews had kind of made that their headquarters in Israel after Jerusalem was destroyed. So this is 120 years after Jerusalem was destroyed. Christianity is still a relatively new religion. To put it into context where people who've seen movies about this period can put it in their framework, this is right around the time of the movie Gladiator, which was another churning of stuff within the Roman Empire. Bar Kokhba revolt was already 60 years later. So it was Bar Kokhba revolt was about 60 years after the destruction of the temple, and this is another 60 years after that. So nobody who's alive from the temple period is still alive. There's people who would have been kids, maybe 15, 20-year-old during the Bar Kokhba revolt that are still alive, but they're in their 70s or 80s. And that actually is what we're going to talk about right now. And it's funny, you said, went from talking about how old you feel and birthdays, is this line. And it actually says, the commentary that comes before the translation here, it says, it's a mitzvah by Torah law to mention the Exodus from Egypt at night. But some held that the mitzvah was like tefillin, phylacteries, right, or tefillin, or ritual fringes, which are talis, right, fulfilled only during the day and not at night. So some people said that, is it really a nighttime mitzvah? And they're going to establish why it is. Now, you can guess why, because it happened at night. The first Passover happened at night. But here's the line that actually is in the Mishnah. The Exodus from Egypt is mentioned at night, adjacent to the recitation of Shema, which is not there in the text, but we'll explain. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, I'm approximately 70 years old, and though I have long held this opinion, I was never privileged to prevail and prove that there is a biblical obligation to fulfill the accepted custom and have the Exodus from Egypt mentioned at night until Ben Zoma interpreted it homiletically and proved it obligatory. So the line literally in the Mishnah is that Elazar ben Azariah said, I'm like a 70-year-old man, or I am around 70 years old, and I never understood it until Ben Zoma explained it to me. And there's an interesting discussion in the Haggadah, which is, was he really 70 years old? Was he really that old? Or did he say, I felt like a 70-year-old man, and I'm like a 70-year-old man? And some people said that when it finally dawned on him, he had the wisdom of like a 70-year-old man, that he attained that kind of wisdom and maybe even turned gray. And because it says, I am approximately 70 years old, and they took that to mean I'm like a 70-year-old man, but he wasn't really 70. But there's this kind of understanding that, look, that maybe what he really means is, I'm an older guy, and I finally discovered, I finally makes sense, because Ben Zoma explained it to me. And he explained it to me in a way that I could understand it, that I could understand why is it a mitzvah to talk about the Exodus in the evening time? Why is it? So now we're going to get the explanation. And here's the explanation, right? It says in Deuteronomy, it says in the book of Devarim, Ben Zoma derived it as stated, that you may remember the day you went out of the land of Egypt, all the days of your life. That's what it says in the Torah. It says literally, kol yemei chayecha. So the questionable word here is kol, all the days of your life. This is all in the Haggadah. I'm telling you, open up a Haggadah, it's right there in the Haggadah. So what is all the days of your life? That must mean the nights as well. If it was just going to be the day, it wouldn't say kol. But kol if it said the days of your life, it would just mean the daytime. But kol yemei chayecha means the whole day. It means morning and evening. We have to talk about the Exodus. So again, they're kind of trying to talk, they're getting to this issue of like, why would we remember the Exodus at nighttime? And of course, why when we say the Shema, do we also sing the song Mi Chamocha? Why do we sing about the Exodus both in the morning and in the evening? Why do we, they're looking for a text that proves it. And so they say the word kol in Deuteronomy tells us that it's a nighttime. But the rabbis now are going to challenge that. But the rabbis say, no, maybe that's not the explanation, because they say the word all, kol there, doesn't mean the days of your life. It also refers to not just this world, but the world to come in the days of the Messiah. So kol yemei hayecha mean not just your days in this world, but your days in the next world. That's why it says kol. It has nothing to do with daytime or nighttime. It has to do with eternity. Now, this is an interesting discussion, because now, once they've said that, once they've had this as an opportunity to say that Exodus is not just for this world, but we're going to be talking about it in the next world, that opens up a whole nother can of worms. Do we really talk about the Exodus the whole time? That whole discussion, by the way, is just in the Mishnah. That isn't very common necessarily in the Mishnah. Oftentimes the Mishnah will just give a law and that's it. Here we actually see a debate within the Mishnah. And when the Mishnah does it, it very rarely does it with a group of rabbis, or mention the rabbis by name over and over again, which the Gemara does. The Mishnah will oftentimes say, a rabbi said this, and then the other people said this. So one rabbi will say this, and then it'll say, but the sages, which is the Chachamim, and the rabbis and the sages, the other people said this. And that's the way the Mishnah usually does it, because it doesn't go through long debates. The Gemara, on the other hand, has no issue having lots of different rabbis give lots of different opinions, that you've already seen it and you're going to see it today. But now they've opened up this thing about the world to come. So the fundamental dispute between Ben Zoma and the sages appears in the Mishnah, and the Baraita cites its continuation. So the other texts now they're going to bring in, the Baraita, the other texts from this period, they're going to bring them in. It's not in the Mishnah, but they're going to say, we have old texts that do that. Disputing the position of the sages that say all the days of your life refers to both this world and the days of the Messiah. And here's what it says. It was taught in a Baraita, so one of these other old sections, that Ben Zoma said to the sages, and they're saying, like, when Ben Zoma taught this to Ben Azariah, Elazar Ben Azariah, you only heard part of it. This is what Ben Zoma really was trying to say. Is the Exodus from Egypt mentioned in the days of the Messiah? Was it not already said that Jeremiah prophesied in the days of the Messiah, behold, days are coming, says the Lord, when they will no longer say, the Lord lives who brought the children out of the land of Egypt. Rather, as the Lord lives that brought up and led the seed of Israel up out of the north country from all the countries where I had driven them. And that's a line from Jeremiah. We read the prophet Jeremiah not too long ago. He wrote about life during the time of the destruction of the first temple. He was very negative for the most part, but occasionally he's very hopeful. And he's hopeful in the midst of this tragedy. And so this is one of the more hopeful lines. And so they just quoted Jeremiah, who actually kind of refutes this idea that we're going to be talking about the Exodus from Egypt later on. What Jeremiah just said is that we're going to get to a point in Jewish history where we're not going to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. We're going to talk about the Jews coming back after the destruction of the temple. So he told the people the destruction was going to happen. As we know, he also lived through it, and he went into exile. He went to Egypt during the destruction, and from tradition, we believe he died there. He never came back. But he told the people, you will come back. And not only that, he told the people right here in chapter 23 that when you come back, you're not going to talk about the Exodus from Egypt anymore. You're going to talk about your own Exodus from your other countries that you come from in this exile, from Assyria, from Iraq, from Iran, from all the areas that, were part of Mesopotamia in those days, and maybe even further, in the North Country, could all the way up to Turkey or up to the Caucasus or some of the other areas where Jews might have been exiled during those exiles. And so, interestingly, we have a Jewish tradition from the Bible that people will get to a point where they won't talk about the Exodus anymore. No, you and I know we've never stopped talking about the Exodus. When the Jews came back from that exile, they talked about Egypt. They never stopped talking. We've never stopped talking about Egypt. For 3,000 years, we haven't stopped talking about it. But interestingly, the rabbis imagined that their ancestors might have not talked about it like they did. And we're going to see something even more amazing. Because remember, this text from the Gemara, this text from the later part of the Talmud, was written by Jews who were living in exile after the destruction of the Second Temple. So these people have now lived through, not only have they 700 years earlier, dealt with the First Temple's destruction, they've dealt with 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, the destruction of the Second Temple. And what does this lead us to? An amazing concept. The sages rejected this claim, and they said to him that these verses do not mean that the future exodus from Egypt will be uprooted from its place and will be mentioned no more. Rather, redemption from the subjugation of the kingdoms will be primary, and the exodus of Egypt will be secondary. So you're not going to stop talking about it completely. It's just we're going to talk more about our own redemption from Babylonia, from those exiles, more than we'll talk about the Egyptian exodus. So that we don't forget about it. It just doesn't, it's not the primary thing on our minds. Okay? You can guess where I'm going to go with this in a second. Don't worry. They'll take me there. I don't have to say it. They'll say it. They'll take us there. Yeah. So a little tangent here, which are going to open up and they'll come back to it. On a similar note, you say the meaning of the expressions, it will not say, and they will no longer mention, are not absolute, as in the verse, your name shall no longer be Jacob, rather Israel will be your name. Right? So when Jacob's name is changed to Israel by God after he wrestles with the angel, right? Remember when Jacob's name was changed? The angel says to him, you'll no longer be called Jacob, rather Israel. Now we still call him Jacob. So it didn't literally mean you'll never, ever, ever be called Jacob again. Your name will never be Yaakov. You'll never hear that name again. We call you Israel, and we'll also call you Jacob. We call him Jacob all the time. We call him Jacob in the Amidah. We don't say Avraham, Yitzhak, Yisrael. We say Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov. We use Jacob all the time. His name didn't go away. It's just, here it is. Not that the name will Jacob be entirely uprooted from its place, but the name Israel be the primary name to which the name Jacob will be secondary, as the Torah continues to refer to him as Jacob after this event. So again, Torah continued to call him that, but we also call ourselves Bnei Yisrael. We don't call ourselves Bnei Yaakov. We call ourselves Bnei Yisrael. So in a sense, we use Israel a lot. But he's still called Jacob. It didn't go away. It's just not his main name. Now we get back to that, by the way, that's not going to go away. But now let's get back to the question of, what about our exoduses? What about our difficult periods of history? Now look at this line. And I'm telling you, the fact that this was written 1,500 years ago is amazing, or 1,700 years ago, because it could have been written 50 years ago. It could have been written 7 months ago. It also says the ultimate redemption will overshadow the previous redemption in the verse. Isaiah, it says, do not remember the former events, do not ponder things of old. Now, Isaiah says that. They kind of took it out of context, but they're telling you, what is Isaiah talking about? What's that line mean? The Gemara explains, do not remember the former events, that is the subjugation to the kingdoms, and do not ponder things of old. And that is the exodus from Egypt, which occurred before the subjugation to the nations. So Isaiah kind of warns us about this, or cautions us, or tells us, we will not remember the exodus from Egypt like we remember our other more recent subjugations. Okay, so Isaiah actually tells us that. There's a biblical precedence for that. There's a prophetic, just like we read Jeremiah, who kind of set this up, that there'd be a time when we remember these other exoduses, these redemptions. Isaiah says, yeah, that's what happens. You're going to see this right now. With regard to the following verse, behold, I will do new things now, and it will spring forth, which is also from Isaiah. Rav Yosef taught in a Baraita. This refers to the future war of Gog and Magog, which will cause all earlier events to be forgotten. The rabbis just said, when the final redemption takes place, the final battle, the apocalypse as we have it, we're not going to remember those other things. We're not going to remember the Exodus. We're not going to remember the Babylonian exile. We're not going to remember the Roman destruction. Everything is going to be forgotten. Now, of course, will it really be forgotten, or will it just be kind of like, we don't talk about it that much anymore? They're saying, and again, this is the battle that the war that people have been expecting for 2,000 years, because it's the same. The war of Gog and Magog is what it's called in the book of Revelation, right? Christians adapted this same apocalyptic battle as the battle between Christ and the Antichrist. This is the same battle that we were talking about first, and then they adapted it and brought it into their tradition. The rabbis are still, they're talking about it in their day, still expecting it to happen soon. Christians have been waiting it for 2,000 years. We've been waiting for it for 2,200 years. I mean, the question of when is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? Is it still going to happen? The people who believe it will happen and that it's going to be the final battle, when you see lines like that, they're assuming that the battle is going to be so big that everything else from the past is going to seem like nothing after that. So everybody with me so far? They're literally saying whatever events happened in the past, including leaving Egypt, that is so big that we have a holiday every year called Passover to celebrate it. That every time we think about Tisha B'Av and the destruction of the first temple and the destruction of the second temple, people won't even be thinking about that stuff anymore, because the next battle is going to make us forget the previous stuff, or it's going to recede so far back. Now, is that true? Has that happened? I don't know. There's a whole lot more books that have been written about the Holocaust in the last 100 years than there have been about the Exodus. I'm not joking. I mean, that's like, I'm not saying that, in a facetious way. Think about how many thousands of books of the Holocaust, how many movies have been made. I mean, I can count, 10, 11 movies that have been made in the last 70 years about the Exodus. How many hundreds, if not thousands, of movies about the Holocaust have been made? I mean, you know that this is true. It's partly because as the Talmud is about to describe, this is human nature. Let's explain. The rabbis will give us a parable, an example, an analogy, if you will. Here's a very interesting analogy. The Gemara cites a parable. To what is this comparable? To a person who was walking along the way, and a wolf accosted him, attacked him, right? And he survived it. And he continued to tell the story of the wolf until a lion attacked him, and he survived it. And then he started telling the story of the lion. And then a snake attacked him, and he survived it. And he forgot both the lion and the wolf, but he continued to tell the story of the snake. Each encounter was more dangerous, and each escape more miraculous than the last. So we continue to relate the most recent story. So too with Israel. More recent troubles caused the earlier troubles to be forgotten. It's a very interesting idea. Very interesting idea. I would make the argument that even though Passover is still one of the most widely celebrated Jewish holidays, we have a holiday in 3 weeks that virtually no one's going to commemorate, which is Tisha B'Av. But there are more people that commemorate Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, than Tisha B'Av. There's more people. I'm just telling you, if I put together a holiday observance for Yom HaShoah, we'll get, maybe a couple dozen people here if we're lucky, or it'll be good. If I do a Tisha B'Av program here, I'll get 4 people, 5 people. Passover exists in a different way. And Passover exists in a different way to some extent because Tisha B'Av and Yom HaShoah they're just days of sadness. We don't really, on Tisha B'Av and Yom HaShoah, even though we're supposed to on Yom HaShoah talk about survival, in Israel it's called Yom HaShoah Gvura, the day of the Shoah, the Holocaust, and also courage and of heroism. So they traditionally were also supposed to talk about things like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and acts of resistance, physical and spiritual resistance. In America, we're more likely to just remember death and destruction on those days. But regardless of how it's commemorated, our holidays of sadness are really not ones of talking about the positive part of it. Egypt, we always talk about slavery. We always talk about the murder of Jewish babies in the Nile. We always talk about, what generations of slavery must have been like on the people. But we always talk about the liberation. We always focus on the liberation. Yom HaShoah and Tisha B'Av have no, and then we survived to it. There's none of that. We talk about the holidays, Jewish holidays, or they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. There is no let's eat on Tisha B'Av, it's a fast day, and there's no let's eat on Yom HaShoah because it doesn't seem appropriate. If Yom HaShoah was also celebrated, let's say, with the survival of the Jewish people, it would be different. Look, Israel knew what they were doing when they did it. They did it a week before Yom HaAtzmaut so that Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut would go together. March of the Living, the annual trip where they take Jewish kids to Poland to march from Auschwitz, from Birkenau to Auschwitz, and then they take them by plane the next day to Israel for them to celebrate eventually Yom HaAtzmaut in the same week, is intentional so that the kids learn about the redemption or the exodus from Europe to the liberation in Israel. That's an intentional act of doing essentially what the Gemara just said we do, which is it's human nature to talk about how we almost got killed, but then survived. And then we focus on the last experience. And so, human nature, they're saying, is for us to focus on what happened most recently to us. The last time we almost died, which I think is pretty accurate. I guess some people would say, well, The greatest story is the one that was the most miraculous. You know, if you had a near-death experience 40 years ago, and it's really amazing that you survived versus a near-death experience that you had 2 years ago that was not quite as miraculous, hey, you might still talk about the one that was the most miraculous. But again, for most of us, we relate the story of what just happened. We talk about the most recent troubles that we just survived. That's what's on our mind. That's what we relate to. And the rabbis just told us that's the way the Jewish people have looked at Jewish history. And to some extent, that's the case. It's very difficult to talk about the Holocaust without people using the statements that, you know, it was the most egregious act in humanity, right? There's never been a case of, you know, destruction and genocide like the Holocaust. I don't know that if you were a Jew that lived in Rome, Roman Israel during the land, you know, in the land of Eretz Israel during the Roman occupation and destruction of the temple, that you might have felt that was pretty bad too. It's very difficult to tell somebody who just survived October 7th that the pogrom and the fact that they miraculously survived, you know, terrorists running through their kibbutz and massacring their neighbors, and they were spared because they happened to have had a door that they couldn't get into. It's very difficult to tell that person that your story is less powerful than the Holocaust, the family that survived in the woods in the 1940s. It's very difficult to make a justification that that's the case. People generally think that the experience that they survived, if it was truly one where they could have been killed, how do you not say that that's not miraculous? So this is a very powerful text to read today, especially in the last, 285 days, not to think about the fact that people are now contextualizing Jewish history around this. It's hard for me to say, yeah, but the stuff that came before is more important than what just happened. Because to some extent, you're saying, but this is where we are today. I mean, as much as we want to learn from history, right? As much as we want to say, and we don't want history to repeat itself. And as much as we say, we never want to forget, right? Never forget. That's what we say. Okay, but what does it mean today? Because if we don't discuss or deal with the fact that Hamas is still an entity that, can regroup, then this isn't a historical discussion. I mean, nobody's worried about the Romans coming back to the land of Israel. As bad as that was, we're not worried about the Nazis regrouping for the most part. I don't think a lot of people are worried about Nazis regrouping and taking over Germany again. But people are very worried that if Hamas is not completely dismantled, it'll come back. So it's very normal for us to say, yeah, it's not really even history yet. So to answer or to build on what this person just said, hey, I survived the snake. Is that snake still there? The lion and the wolf, that happened a long time ago. That lion and wolf are probably not around anymore. But that snake might still be in the bushes. I survived a snake 3 years ago. I'm not worried about that snake. I'm worried about the snake that I just saw, So it's a really powerful text, and one that, again, you asked me last year if I read, the last time I read this text, I didn't feel like I do today. So it's a very interesting text about Jewish history because yeah. Yeah. No, but he's most likely to, yes, to say that he forgot it is a little, it appears that maybe that they forgot it, but what they're most likely going to talk about is that, but again, look, How many times did we say after October 7th that this was the most violent and murderous attack on Jews since the Holocaust? I mean, we didn't say murderous attack. We said since the Holocaust, which means we invoked the Holocaust at that time, which would be like me saying that snake attack reminded me a lot of when I got attacked by the lion. So we don't forget it. We just are putting it into our framework of our reference is what we just lived through, what we just survived. The amazing thing, of course, is that we're still here and we're still telling these stories. And my guess is, as long as we're here, this will continue to happen. We will have wolves and lions and snakes.
My boss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Mike just said, two Jewish, him and another Jewish guy did not want to call their office solution the final solution when they talked about it. Yeah, I think Jews will oftentimes, we don't forget. But again, the attacks on October 7th made a lot of Jews react in a way that, as much as people sat through Schindler's List and were emotionally affected by it, I didn't get people calling me on this, on my phone going, "What can I do to stop anti-Semitism?" So
Right last night, we were watching some show, America's Got Talent. They had a group of singers, Jewish and Palestinian.
from where?
Were they from Israel?
Jewish and Palestinian singers together on America's Got Talent or on the GTM? Interesting.
Yeah.
How'd they do?
They did good.
Good.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And but so it's human nature, it's historical nature, it's Jewish nature. Again, I don't know that they would not be forgotten, but I mean the older ones, the phrase that they use, right, for the troubles are sarot, which is tsuris, right? Sarot. The previous ones are not, to some extent, they use the word forgotten. It's a pretty powerful line. And the parable of the wolf, the lion and the snake. But let's get back to this issue that they just introduced this issue of, they called people by their other names in the Bible, and do we not call them by their names? So, having mentioned the changing of Jacob's name, the Gemara addresses the changing of Avraham and Sarah's name, right? What is the meaning of changing Avram's name to Avraham? As it is stated, Avram is Abraham. So that line is from Chronicles, but we know that when it happened in Genesis, the Gemara explains initially he became a father, a minister, and a prominent person, only to Aram. And then he was only called Avram, which means a father of many, a father of people, father of Aram, or again, father of Ram, but let's just say it's just Aram. Ultimately, with God's blessing, he became the father of the entire world. So he was called Avraham, father of the masses, of Hamon, as it is stated, I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. Not just the Middle East, everyone. You're the father of humanity to some extent, the Abrahamic faiths. What about Sarah? Sarai. Similarly, what is the meaning of changing Sarai's name to Sarah? The same concept applies to Sarai as it does to Avram. Sarai is Sarah. Gemara explains initially she was a princess, a Sar, right, a Sarah, only to her nation. My princess, Sarai, which is my princess, Sar Shali. But ultimately she becomes Sarah, a general term indicating that she is the princess, right? Essentially the princess for the entire world. Okay. So now they're going to say, with regard to Abraham's name, Ben Kapara taught, anyone who calls Abraham Avram transgresses a positive mitzvah, as is stated, and your name shall be Abraham. This is a positive mitzvah to refer to him as Abraham. So you're not supposed to call him Avram anymore. When you talk about Avraham, you call him Avraham. You don't call him by his old name. Rabbi Eliezer says, one who calls Avram transgresses a negative mitzvah, as it is stated, and your name shall no longer be Avram. So it says your name shall be Avraham, but it also says you shall no longer be Avram. So if you say it, you're actually transgressing a negative mitzvah, right? Because that also says that in the Torah too. The Gemara asks, but if we consider these obligatory statements, then from here we must also infer that anyone who calls Sarah Sarai also transgresses a positive or negative mitzvah. And the Gemara answers, there in the case of Sarah, it is not a general mitzvah. Rather, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Avraham alone, God said to Avram, your wife Sarai, you shall not call her Sarah. You shall not call her Sarai. Rather, Sarah is her name. In contrast, that this is stated regarding Avram in general terms. Your name shall no longer be Avram. So, because God only says it to Avraham, says you call her Sarah, it doesn't have the same effect. Okay, that's not the end. Don't worry. Again, the Gemara asks, but if that is so, one who calls Jacob, about whom is written, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, would also be transgressing the same kind of mitzvah, right? When God says to Jacob, your name is no longer Jacob, if that's the case for Jacob, we call him Israel, but we just said, sometimes we still call him Jacob. So if you're going to apply that law that you just said, it's a mitzvah, then wouldn't that be the same thing for Jacob? The Gemara answers, it is different there, as the verse reverts back, and God himself refers to Jacob as Jacob, as it is written, before his descent to Egypt, and God said to Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, Hineni, here I am. So the problem, of course, is that in the Torah, God continues to call him Jacob. And that's exactly right, Mike. Mike just said exactly what I was just going to say. And that is because there is a writer who never calls him Israel. The other writer always calls him Jacob and will continue to call him Jacob. So the writers make that very, very obvious. Actually, that's one of the ways we can tell which writer is writing based on but the rabbis would never say that, and the rabbis will not say that. And so they cannot say that. So they will not say that. And so that is not something. The only time we ever hear a rabbi kind of tipping it is not until the Middle Ages. And that is the rabbi that's known as Ibn Ezra, who was a Spanish Sephardic rabbi who kind of said, those who know. That's what he said. Yeah. That's about as far as we get. And he made that admission with regards to some stuff that was just clearly did not make sense unless you ascribe it to a different author. But yes, generally the rabbis never will say anything like that and won't say, hey, that's a different intention or that's a different writer. And they must have known. I mean, some people must have said. The people who knew it well would have known. Would tip it, yes. But the rabbis will never say that because they're working with one text. So, they just said that the Bible refers to Jacob later on, after his name is changed, is still Jacob. Wait a second, we have a case of it in the Bible too. Rabbi Yossi bar Avin with Abraham. Rabbi Yossi ben bar Avin, and some say Rabbi Yossi bar Zaveda said, he raised an objection to the statements of Bar Kapara and Rabbi Eliezer based on what is said in the recounting of the history of the Jewish people. You are the Lord God, who chose Avram, who took him out of Ur Kasdim and made his name Avraham. That's what it says in the book of Nehemiah. which is one of the later books of the Bible. So here the Bible is referring to him as Avram. And the Gemara responds, there the prophet is recounting God's praises, including that which was that the situation was the way it was originally, before his name was changed to Avraham. Indeed, the verse continues, you took him out of Ur Kasdim and made his name Avraham, and found his heart faithful before you, and made a covenant with him and to give him the land of Canaan, to give to his descendants, and you fulfilled your words for your righteousness. That's the whole text from Nehemiah. And so the rabbis say, guess what? He's only recounting history. He's not calling him by Avram just randomly. He's quoting the Bible. So no, that's not the same. So we're going to now skip ahead to the next section, which is further a couple pages or page or so after, which is from page 14, which is now about interrupting prayers. They're in a discussion about interrupting prayers and when you can interrupt your prayer to God to talk to somebody else. And this is in the context, again, of breaking stuff up. And they talk about prayers, and then they talk about food, and it's a long halachic discussion. But they get to this point right here, which is where the Ein Yaakov picks up. And it says, Rav said, anyone who greets another person in the morning before he prayed, it is as if he built an altar for idol worship. As it is stated, cease you from man, in whose nostrils there is breath. For how little is he to be accounted? And so this tells us that in Isaiah, that human beings are not at the level of God. So when one soul is breathed in through those nostrils in the morning, he should turn to no one other than God. Do not read the word bameh, how, but rather bama, altar. So if you are praying to God, or even when you're supposed to be praying to God and you start talking to other people, the first energy out of your breath should be to God, not to somebody else. And they say it's almost as if you establish an altar to an idol. Interesting, right? Pretty strict. Shmuel said, the word bameh should not be taken in anything other than its literal connotation. The verse must therefore be understood. How did you consider him so significant that you gave him priority and not God? Certainly you should have honored God first. So just understand it as bameh, and like in what way is a person so significant that you have to recognize him before you recognize God? Rav Sheshet raises an objection. We learned in our Mishnah that in the breaks between the paragraphs, one may greet an individual due to respect, which is the part that we just skipped over. There are times and breaks where you can speak to somebody during your prayers. If someone greets you, you can respond. One may greet an individual due to respect and respond to another's greeting due to respect, despite the fact that the recitation of Shema precedes the Amidah prayer. So, what is this about? Rabbi Abba explained this. The prohibition against greeting another in the morning refers specifically to when one sets out early to greet him at his door. If one simply happens to encounter another person, he is permitted to greet him. So you're not supposed to intentionally go out and start greeting people before you greet God, before you say thank you to God. But if you ran into somebody accidentally, there's no issue. Yeah. Yeah, you're not supposed to, because the understanding is that your conversation with God, there's nothing more, there's no entity more important than God. And to do that to God, the understanding, the way, again, the mentality of it is you can't break off the prayer. Now, there are breaks in prayer where you're allowed to do it, where you're supposed, look, my tradition is, and people have seen me do it, and what I don't do. If somebody sneezes in the middle of a prayer, I never say bless you to them in the middle of the prayer. If I'm talking, if I'm talking about something and someone sneezes, I'll say bless you, but I'll never say bless you to somebody while they sneeze in the middle of a prayer. If I'm blessing God in that moment, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And the tradition is that like that's supposed to be your focus. When you're in prayer, you're supposed to be blessing God. It doesn't mean that the other people aren't there too, but you recognize them in a break or in a time in between when in the middle of the prayer. So yeah, I mean, I mean that goes in around our table. You know, if we're doing the kiddush, we don't start talking in the middle of a prayer. My kids know that. I mean, they've always known that. Somebody doesn't start talking to somebody in the middle of a prayer. It's disrespectful. Not to me, it's disrespectful to God. It's disrespectful to be in the midst of a prayer and to break off and answer your phone or do something else. It just doesn't make any sense. Again, if there's a break between the prayers, the rabbis, and we skipped over that part because essentially it's a common sense thing. If there's a natural break between the prayers where it's not just, I broke between my prayers, and this is the part that we just read. I'm in the middle of saying a prayer over my food. I haven't eaten my food yet. You're not supposed to talk. And you'll see Orthodox people do this stringently. If they've washed their hands before they eat the bread, they will not talk until they've eaten the bread. So you don't talk to someone if they wash their hands, they'll hum, they'll nod, but they will not talk to you until after they've said hamotzi and eaten the challah. And people, it's kind of funny when it takes a while for everyone to wash their hands. The first person that washes their hands is going to be sitting there in silence for a long time while everyone else washes their hands. But the tradition is, that's if you have one wash station. But the tradition is you don't talk, because even though it's a break between the prayers, it's not really a break between the prayers. So there are breaks, and then there are breaks. There's breaks where it's a break. And then there's other times where it's a break only because you have to move between one action and the other. So, you lit the candles, you don't talk before you say the blessing on them. So, and that even goes in some synagogues where they will say nothing between the Chatzi Kaddish and the Amidah. They won't give directions of what to do between that. And I get it, but if you're talking to people who have no idea what you're doing, it just seems rude. And so that's why, I don't do it, but it's considered as continuous action. The Chatzi Kaddish to the Amidah, some people consider a continuous action. So, Well, I think sometimes people do that because of that issue. So yeah. So with regard to the same verse, Rabbi Yonah said, and some said that Rabbi Zerah said, anyone who tends to his own affairs before he prays as though he's built an altar. And they said to Rabbi Yonah, did you say that this was as if one built an altar? Rabbi Yonah responded to them, no, I said it's simply prohibited. So he didn't go, I didn't say that, but he said, you don't do it. And as Rav Idi Bar Avin said, that Rav Yitzhak Bar Ashian said, a person is prohibited to attend to his own affairs before he prays. That is stated, righteousness shall go before him, and he shall make his footsteps on a path. One should first pray and acknowledge the righteousness of his Creator, and only then should he set out on his way. Yeah, no, it's true. And Rav Idi Bar, look, I never took my phone into services until COVID. I never had it in. And now I worry that, we're not on, that we're not streaming or something's down, and so it bothers me because I never wanted to think about that stuff. Rav Idi Bar Avin said, Rav Yitzhak Bar Ashian said, anyone who first prays and only then sets on his way, the Holy One, blessed be he, tends to his affairs. As it is stated, righteousness shall go before him, and he shall make footsteps on a path. God will set righteousness before him and satisfy all his wishes when he sets out on his way. So again, look, if you pray and then take care of your business, God takes care of your business. That's what he said. And that's a good reason to. Now we're going to finish with this little section, and we're going to then turn to the part we're going to read the rest of the night. This is an interesting section right here. And this is in Ein Yaakov. Having mentioned his name, the Gemara tangentially cites what Rabbi Yonah said. They just quoted Rabbi Yonah, said that Rabbi Zera said. Now here's another thing. He said something, and now we're going to tell you something else he said. Because this doesn't really have anything to do with the prayer business. But listen to this one. One who goes 7 nights without a dream is called evil, as is stated, he who has it will abide satisfied, savea, and he will not be visited by evil. Rabbi Yonah reinterprets the verse. Do not read savea, satisfied, but rather sheva, 7. One who sleeps for 7 nights without being visited by a dream is called evil. Now, the line from Proverbs is totally out of context. I mean, I'll just show you the line from Proverbs. It's a great line. One who fears God earns life and shall abide in contentment, free from misfortune. So, and then talks about, which the bad way. But this phrase, Yirad Adonai, right? One who fears God, will have a life, will have life, Chaim, and will be satisfied. Will be satisfied. So this idea that fearing God will lead to a life of contentment. They totally changed to some extent, the meaning of this. And exactly right. Where would you even see that? So they read the word savea, which is this word, sin bet ayin, and turned it to shin bet ayin, savea to sheva. So, I mean, again, it's a totally different meaning, but they found a line which says, if you read satisfied instead 7, that 7 days with no dreams, it's bad news. Now, what are they talking about here? What are they talking about? What are they talking about? Why would somebody not have dreams? And why is that such a, why are we so concerned with that? Well, first of all, it shows us that they put a lot of power in dreams. They felt that it was very normal. Whatever your dreams were, they definitely needed to be interpreted. We read elsewhere in the Talmud that a dream uninterpreted is like a letter unopened. So they believed our dreams had meanings, not always necessarily obvious meanings. They saw symbols in dreams. They saw secrets in dreams. Of course, we have Joseph, a dream interpreter in the Bible. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no level of this that's not, it's seen as an important part of who we are. Look, they didn't understand necessarily psychology the way we do, but they definitely understood that our subconscious and even our unconscious mind had a role to play in what we are, who we are. And while they didn't have necessarily therapy in those days, what people found is that you could interpret someone's dreams and understand what's going on with them in a way that they might not otherwise open up with, because people knew that their dreams weren't literal. The things that they had in their dream weren't necessarily going to happen, but they might unlock some secrets to what was going on with people. So there were traditions in the rabbis allude to, and we don't have great explanations of them. Sometimes the rabbis will say, if you dream about a goat, this is what will happen. If you dream about this will be, there are occasional little nuggets that they'll give us, but there isn't like a dream interpretation class that we can sit in on in the Talmud. But there are things we pick up from the dreams. More importantly, we pick up from them that it's really important to have dreams. And that if we're not dreaming, if we're not aware of those dreams, it's not good. It's not good. Something is happening to us that's not good. And they knew that. They said it. They just said it. So what do they mean? What could they be alluding to? I mean, it's very possible that they understood that if people are not sleeping right, if they're not in a good, healthy dream cycle, of getting enough, deep REM sleep, there something bad might be really happening to them. They're under stress. There is a depression. Maybe there's some type of problem that they're dealing with that's affecting their sleep, and that's why they're not dreaming. That's not why they're, that it is indicative of something that is very real that could be going wrong, and that is manifested in the dreams. So what's very interesting about this is that they understood that this is not healthy. If people are not dreaming, if they're not aware of what's happening in that state of their mind, it was not good. And we now know how important sleep is for our mental health. We understand how dangerous it is for people who are sleep deprived and who are who are not going through the necessary brain reset that happens to us when we sleep. So they understood that. I mean, this is their explanation of it, and their warning. Their warning. And Rav Aha, son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, said to him, Rabbi Chia, right, his father, right, said that Rabbi Yochanan said as follows: anyone who fills himself with matters of Torah and goes to sleep, they do not deliver evil tidings to him. As it is stated, he who lies satisfied will not be visited by evil. What is that? That's that same line. And rather than read it, he who has it will abide satisfied, he will not be visited by evil. He who lies satisfied will not be visited by evil. It has nothing to do with 7. It has to do with the fact that if someone goes to sleep with Torah on their minds, they will have a good night's sleep and nothing bad will happen to them. So why do we do this at night? So that you will have good dreams and that you will go to sleep satisfied and that bad things will not happen to you. You will not have any more bad stuff happen. So it's good. It's good to fill your mind with Torah before you go to sleep. Look, I don't know if this is the only thing you fill your mind with, but I will tell you that it is very common for me and for other people. I know it's not just me, so that's why I'm saying this, that my dreams are oftentimes affected by the last thing I watched on television. I mean, it happens all the time. And sometimes I get mad because I wake up and I'll go, that's stupid. That dream had nothing to do with other than what I just saw on TV. And sometimes, stupid because the thing I watched wasn't that, it was entertaining, but it wasn't necessarily. It was just a continuation. It was my mind making another episode, if you will. But it does kind of tell us what we fill our minds with before we go to sleep. I would tell you that it's been many, many years. I've not allowed myself, for the most part, to go to sleep with the last thing that I see. I don't watch local news before I go to sleep anymore. I don't watch any news before I go to sleep anymore. So that is not what I go to sleep with. I try to go to sleep with things that will be happy. I don't go to sleep with things that scare me or I don't watch horror movies anyways, but I would never watch something like that before I went to sleep. You, yes, that's true. No, but you guys probably don't watch stuff like that before you go to sleep. Unless you're watching Dodger games and then they give you a nightmare the last few nights. But I do think it's important, to go to sleep with a good sense of hopefully to finish the day with something positive. And that's one of the reasons why we're supposed to go to sleep with the Shema, because we go to sleep with a sense of oneness. We go to sleep with a sense of continuity, a sense of hopefully a feeling of being satisfied. So the idea here is to go to sleep satisfied. Go to sleep with a good feeling and not with a feeling of dread, things, chocolate, not to go to sleep. I guess if it makes you satisfied, a Snickers, right? A Snickers makes you satisfied. If you go to, that's a good commercial for Snickers. He who lies with a Snickers will not be visited by evil. Brought to you by Snickers. So that people are going to have that in their dreams tonight. No, I think what's important again here is that we're not supposed to go to sleep with bad thoughts in our head. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts on this? Anybody have any rituals that they do before they go to sleep to not be visited by evil? Definitely didn't. People didn't want to have any bad stuff happen at night. Yeah, and they realized that we're susceptible at night too. By the way, I should say that in the nighttime we're susceptible to bad dreams and bad thoughts, and sometimes again they understood that if we put ourselves into the right frame of mind before we go to sleep. What? Mike just said he's never had a nightmare. That's pretty amazing. Never heard of that. Thank you. Serious. Yeah, don't dream about me tonight. But the rabbis actually, interestingly, are a little. I mean, they're not saying it, but they're also saying that they don't want people to go to sleep with lustful urges when they go to sleep, because then they will also be more likely to be visited by evil thoughts and lustful dreams when they go to sleep. They were worried about that. We'll see occasional references to that. Anything in your notes there, Jesse, that says in your book? What? It's not in it? That part's not in it? Huh. Yeah, but but at the end of this one. So we're gonna jump. Well, I didn't know. I thought that part was in my Ein Yaakov, but we're gonna jump to the next section, which is a really beautiful section that hopefully will help us go to sleep with good thoughts. We're gonna go to chapter 16, actually, or page 16. So this is the section where we're going to talk about the rabbi's different kinds of prayers. So this is 16b. So after discussing how people would pray, and this is the sections before, we talked a little bit about how to greet people and more stuff about speaking to people, but also about prayers and what kinds of things how they would pray. We get into this discussion about how people would finish their prayers, specifically when they came to the end of the Amidah and when they came to the end of their prayers in the morning time. And we're going to finish with this today. This is some really, really beautiful prayers. And the beginning of some of the prayers that actually we have, including one that we traditionally say at the end of the Amidah. But these are also prayers that the rabbis wrote, that have been quoted, that other people have adapted for modern prayers. And so these are like rabbis' prayers, their own little riffs, if you will, on prayer. And so we're going to read a series of, and this is a lot like Pirkei Avot, and that the rabbis are quoted and they give this is their prayer. This is like their finishing prayer to the Amidah, or maybe again, like kind of their last prayer. Rabbi Elazar concluded his prayer, said the following: "May it be your will." And whenever we see that phrase, "May it be your will," the Hebrew is Yehi Ratzon Milfanecha. May it be your will, God, Yehi Ratzon, to cause to dwell in our lot love and brotherhood, peace and friendship. That's a nice idea. And may you make our borders rich in disciples, and cause us to ultimately succeed, that we will have a good end and hope. May you set our portion in the Garden of Eden, and may you establish for us a good companion and a good inclination in your world. And may we arise early and find the aspirations of our hearts to fear your name. And may the satisfaction of our souls come before you, which means may you hear our prayers, that we will have spiritual contentment in this world for the best. Again, I mean, if you read the whole line, and may we rise early and find the aspiration of our hearts to fear your name, and may the satisfaction of our souls come before you for the best. So, it's got a lot of stuff in there, right? Let's have peace. You don't like to get up early. Mike doesn't like, may we rise early. But look at this beautiful prayer, right? We want to have peace in our world. We want to have, lots of students, that the work we do is going to be successful, the rabbinic work that we're doing, and let's go into the next world, right? When we come to you in the Garden of Eden, let's be with friends even there. And so let our prayers be answered. Let our prayers be good. It's a beautiful prayer. Look at this prayer. Rabbi Yochanan concluded his prayer. He said the following. Again, another Yehi Ratzon. This is the way people pray, not Baruch Atah Adonai, but Yehi Ratzon. May it be your will, God. I'm not going to open with a blessing of a bracha, which I understand is for everybody. This is kind of my little prayer. May it be your will, Lord our God. And again, this is why when people kind of improvise a prayer in Judaism today, they'll say the words even today, Yehi Ratzon. May it be your will, Lord our God, that you look upon our shame and behold our plight, that you clothe yourself in your mercy and cover yourself with your might, that you wrap yourself in your loving kindness and gird yourself with your grace. And may your attributes of goodness and humility come before you. Wow. I mean, that's a prayer which basically says, God, it's time for you to get up, start helping us, right? Do what's right. Do what's right. Treat us with, a better situation than we're in right now. So you can see the frustration, the feeling of abandonment that people have. But they believe that God has these attributes, right, of chesed, of loving kindness, that God will respond to us in. Oh, yeah. But Rabbi Yochanan, again, this rabbi is writing during the Roman period in the land of Israel. And he's saying, let it be a time for you to have rachem on us. Let us, have mercy on us. Because to some extent, what we're asking God to do is we know that God can punish us, right? He says, we know God will punish us, and sometimes God will be a vengeful God and be a punishing God. But God, put on the part of your existence that's merciful and loving and graceful, and take mercy on us, have mercy on us. Well, here's Rabbi Zera. He concluded his prayers with the following little prayer here. May it be your will, Yehi Ratzon. May it be your will, Lord our God, that we not sin or shame ourselves, and that we do not disgrace ourselves before our forefathers. Which again, they say, in the sense that our actions should not disgrace the actions of our forefathers. I mean, you can figure that out. Do not disgrace our ancestors, right? Do not make us let us not do things that will embarrass our ancestors. So that's a little bit calling us, onto better behavior. Help us, God, not to do things that are going to be sinful and shame us. It's a little bit, help us, God, be better people. A little bit different than the last one. Rabbi Chia, he prayed the following. May it be your will, Lord our God, that your Torah should be our vocation, and may our heart not become faint, nor our eyes dim. Which again is a little bit asking us for God to help us, right? Help us do the right thing, right? Help us Help us make Torah our job, right? Let's have that become our job, God. And don't let us get weak in it, right? Help us have strength to do this. This one's a good one. After his prayer, Rav said the following: May it be your will, Lord our God, that you grant us long life, a life of peace, a life of goodness, a life of blessing, a life of sustenance, a life of freedom, movement from place to place. Right? Which probably means like, let us live in a country where we can go from place to place. A life of dread of sin, a life without shame and disgrace, a life of wealth and honor, a life in which we have love of Torah and reverence for heaven, a life in which you fulfill all the desires of our heart for good. It's a beautiful prayer because it asks for a lot of stuff. You've heard versions of this, yes. Yes, you've heard versions of this. People have adapted some of these prayers. This is one of them. There's another one we're coming to, which I think has been adapted a few times. You've heard different versions of this. But this is, again, helping us with different things, help us with sustenance, help us with success in business, help us with the things we have to have. But also, again, help us not want to do bad things, help us have that strength. This is an interesting one, too. After his prayer, and again, this is Judah Hanasi, right? This is Rav. This is the rabbi. This is the one who organized and edited the Mishnah. Rabbi Judah Hanasi said the following. And remember, Judah Hanasi was a pretty wealthy guy. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, right? And we use that phrase a lot. Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu, right? Our God and God of our forefathers, which recognizes that our God is the same God that our ancestors prayed to. That you save us from the arrogant and from arrogance. You save us from the arrogant, but also from our own arrogance. From a bad man and from a bad mishap. From a yetzer hara, from a bad instinct, right? And from a bad companion, right? That's a really interesting phrase. So all these are ra, right? Bad person and a bad situation, bad, the evil instinct, the yetzer hara, and from a bad a bad companion, a bad neighbor, a bad colleague. And then this is an interesting one, right? From a bad neighbor and from the destructive Satan. This is a reference to Satan, to Satan. And it says Satan, the destructive one, the destructive Satan, Satan HaMashchit, from a harsh trial and from a harsh opponent. Whether he is a member of the covenant, right, a Jew, or whether he's not a member of the covenant. That's his prayer. So there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of stuff in his prayer that we don't see in other prayers. But what's interesting about his prayer that we also don't see in a lot of prayers, and it's kind of in the background here all along, is where are the Gentiles in this? Where are the non-Jewish folk in this? And here it says flat out, there are people who can cause us problems who are a part of the breed, and there's also people who can cause us problems who are not part of the breed. But they're everywhere. They're not only the Gentiles. There's people who are part of the covenant who are a problem, and there's people who are not part of the covenant who are a problem. So again, he's more asking for protection from these things. What are the things, of course, and go through this list, what are the things that we have to worry about? And a lot of these are not in our control. I mean, some of them are to some extent because we can kind of choose who our companions are, but you never know. Sometimes we think our companion's a good companion and we're wrong. But arrogance is an interesting one because that implies that's from ourselves too, right? So, it's from people who are arrogant and also from our own arrogance. And for somebody who's like Rabbi Judah Hanasi, we know from history, from even the Talmud itself, maybe was a victim of his own arrogance in some cases. Maybe he's talking from personal experience. Maybe, again, this guy who's called Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince, understood more than anyone how destructive arrogance can be for a person. And he hits it right from the beginning. Right? Whether we're dealing with someone else's arrogance or our own. So he hits it right there. It's a really powerful prayer. And here's a little thing here, which we get about him. The Gemara notes that Rabbi Judah Nasi would recite this prayer every day, despite the fact that royal officers, stood watch over Rabbi Judah Nasi for his protection. Nevertheless, he prayed to avoid conflict or hindrance resulting from arrogance. Now, the actual text says, and despite the fact that the officers stood watch over Rabbi. So they're saying he said that even though, again, he would have been, they're essentially saying he had an easy opportunity to be arrogant because he was treated like royalty. Now, what's interesting about this, by the way, is that this tells us about this weird situation that Rabbi Judah Hanasi was in, which is that, according to the Talmud, he had a very good relationship with the Romans. So did the Jews look at him as a collaborator? He was so close with the Romans. But he also used that power in order to keep the Jews safe and maintain it. Yeah, Josephus did too. But he definitely was seen as a collaborator. I mean, we don't know. We only know from what he said. Josephus isn't mentioned in the Talmud, so we don't know. No. So we don't know what Jews really thought of him, though he kind of gives away that people didn't like him. People thought he was a collaborator. So people, and because he worked for these guys, right? He went back to Rome. Now, Judah Hanasi lived in Israel from what we see, his whole life, but he would have been a person who would have naturally been arrogant. And there are texts about Judah Hanasi that he went through periods of his life where he got a little wrapped up in his arrogance. Yes. But he's also very wealthy and he's also very powerful. And so people would have looked at him like he's getting a really good deal. And definitely people would have said, this is a guy who, is getting a.
Look at that prayer. He might, if that's true, maybe, he realized he was maybe arrogant at times.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah. Listen, there's a very famous text that he had an attitude of not caring. There's an interesting text about compassion to animals, actually, that supposedly he watched a cow being led to slaughter, and the cow was making noises and trying to get out. And he said something to the effect that that's what you were bred for. And he got punished for that. God punished him with, according to what the Talmud says, horrible abdominal problems for many, many years. So he had horrible abdominal problems as punishment. And it was so bad, supposedly, that according to what the rabbis say, they used to have to make noises. The people would make noises around him when he was in the bathroom because he would scream so loud. I mean, they literally said that, which to me indicates probably really happened. But he was saved from this arrogant situation by supposedly at one point, he was watching one of his staff members, one of his custodial staff, was cleaning up a weasel, it says, like a rat or something in the house, and was sweeping it up. And he told the person to not kill the animal. And according to tradition, and he was cured of his ailment because he had learned his lesson that, you have to have compassion on God's creatures. We don't treat animals as if they're supposed to be destroyed. If we eat an animal, that's our choice, right? The animal, we're not saying they were encouraging people to be vegetarian, but we're not supposed to see animals as just bound for destruction.
They try to do it
In a painless way, yes. And we don't take that for granted. And so Judah Hanassi's original arrogance in that and dismissiveness about life, supposedly he learned from that. So there's traditions that Judah Hanassi was a little, needed to learn that. But yeah. Well, that's why the Talmud the Talmud has that story, right? The Talmud has that story as a lesson to us, not to look at animal life as if, so what? It's just an animal. Yes. Now, look at this prayer. This one's going to open up a little situation for us. After his prayer, Rav Safra said the following: "May it be your will, Lord our God, that you establish peace in the heavenly entourage, the Pamalia Shalmata, right? The heavenly, the heavenly entourage of angels, of whom ministers, each of them minister to a specific nation." Again, this is something we kind of see in the book of Daniel, "and whose infighting causes war on earth. And in the earthly entourage, the sages and among the disciples engaged in the study of Torah, whether they engage in its study for its own sake or not for its own sake. And for all those engaged in Torah study, not for its own sake, may it be your will that they will come to engage in its study for its own sake." What is going on here? Well, he's asking for peace. Peace in the heavens and peace down here on earth. And he's recognizing, of course, that there's people who are studying Torah not for the right reasons. What could be the not right reason for it? Well, if you went to Israel today, there might be people studying in a yeshiva just so they don't have to go into the army or get a job. Maybe there were people like that back then. They were not engaged in Torah study because they wanted to. They were not engaged in it for its own sake. Maybe because their parents told them. Maybe because, again, there was an economic imperative in this. It was an easier way to get through life. He's saying, look, if there are people like that, let's hope eventually they'll come around. They'll eventually be studying Torah for its own sake. So, look, there's nobody anymore that becomes a rabbi for the sake of the money. But there was a period of time in the 1950s and 60s where, believe it or not, the option of becoming a rabbi for some people meant that they were going to have a lucrative job. Now, again, was it as good a pay in the 50s and 60s as becoming a doctor or a lawyer? Not necessarily, but it wasn't as divergent, and the chasm wasn't as big between them. And I suspect that there were rabbis that became rabbis, not again after the 60s. Once salaries for doctors got astronomical, if you were a Jewish person, and your parents were telling you, hey, go to med school, they were talking about it sometimes from the economic standpoint. Not, by the way, anymore. Now it's not quite as, you don't see as many Jews going into medicine for the sake of it's a good career economically. If they are committed to it because they believe in and they want to be in medicine, then absolutely. There was a period of time where people went into medicine because it was lucrative and successful position. There was a time when going into the rabbinate, and again, it was a short window. It was pretty much right after World War II, when there were people who went into the rabbinate, it was a good job. It was a solid job. It was a fairly high paying, stable job. And I think there were people who went into the job, not necessarily because they were motivated to help the community, but because they knew they'd be good at it and because it started to change in the 70s. The salaries, they started to diverge a lot. There were a lot of people by the 70s and 80s who had to have multiple jobs. Yeah. And again, in these days, we can imagine that some people went in because their parents told them that they were supposed to do it. And as we know in Israel today, there's people who economically, it makes sense for them to do it. Now, let's go to the first part though. What the hell are they talking about? Angels are fighting in heaven? Yeah, it's from Daniel. It's some weird stuff. And this stuff is in the Apocrypha, and it's in Christian Midrash too. If you will call it Christian Midrash, which I do, there are Christian stories, and there are occasionally they'll even make movies about this, about the wars in heaven. There was a movie with Christopher Walken that I've referenced before called The Prophecy, which is exactly about these wars that are going on in heaven between the angels. Those are based on legends in apocryphal sources and including in Christological sources. It continues, and it became bigger because of the Antichrist and this idea that there were warring angels going back all the way to Lucifer, who's considered a fallen angel. And you'll see it, of course, in Paradise Lost and in John Milton's amazing version of the wars in heaven. And that one, Paradise Lost, is probably the most famous work ever about it. But there, like I said, there continue to be movies, horror movies made of wars between angels. Those warring angels, in some cases, like Milton's stories and some of these horror movies, they become devils. They become the demons, or these, again, these fallen angels. And you've all heard that phrase before, a fallen angel. Those are angels that were kicked out of heaven. That's what they're alluding to here. Not the fallen angels necessarily, but the predecessor to that. Judaism doesn't really have, or Judaism had it, but it didn't continue to develop this idea that the angels were fighting amongst themselves and that they became that. Because angels in Judaism never developed outside of God. And every angel, essentially, including Satan, is only doing God's work. Satan is destructive, and we don't want Satan around, but we essentially ask for Satan by our behavior, right? Satan doesn't usually work outside of God's direction, right? Even in the book of Job, Satan is working only with God's permission. In the book of Job, Satan can only do what God tells him he's given permission to do. So we don't want Satan around, and that's usually the extent of what Satan is within Judaism. We just read one of the previous blessings talked about keeping the destructive Satan away. So by that period, we definitely don't want Satan around. But this concept of the Antichrist and the devil is not something that we have in Judaism. And even these angels who are fighting are not fighting because they're bad. They're fighting because they represent countries. And these countries can't get along. Why can these countries not get along? Well, maybe there's an energy that goes back and forth between their heavenly representative. Maybe the angels don't like each other, and that's why their countries fight with each other. Or again, maybe the angels are fighting with each other because the people are fighting with each other, and that angel has nothing to do other than represent those people. So the angel of the Jewish people, his name is Michael. That's his name. He's our angel. We like Michael. That's right. Michael is the angel of the Jewish people. Later on, he's the angel for Christians. Later on, he's the angel for other countries. It means literally Mikael, who is like God, right? There is nothing like them. There's nothing like. So Michael's considered there's no angel that we love more than Michael, because he's our angel. He's our angel representative. And that's why he's so important to us. So in Jewish literature, Michael is always the angel that's representing us. Yes. Well, Michael is our angel that we are most attached to. Gabriel is mentioned a little bit too, more than other angels, but Michael, yeah, because this is the angel that we see the most in Jewish sources. So every nation has somebody like Michael for them. The Syrians have their angel. Today, China would have their angel, and the Russians would have their angel, and every country has their angel, and the angels fight amongst themselves in heaven because their countries are fighting, and there's an energy exchange that goes there because to some extent, are we creating what that angel's doing for us, or is that angel making us do what we're doing down here? But what his Rabbi Rav Safra's prayer is that those angels get along in heaven, which of course means we'll have peace here. And he says, and let there be peace amongst the people here in our own little Torah study, right? So when people would argue in the Torah, in the Beit Midrash, let's have peace here too. No, but maybe sometimes the arguments were causing bad blood. And so we don't want any of the bad blood. And then when we think about those people, hey, maybe some of them are not here for the right reasons, which also makes it a hard situation. And so let's hope that those people who are here not for the right reason, won't be here for the right reason. Let's hope they change that. So let's read a couple more blessings. These are great, these blessings. I want to get you to some really good ones. Well, we've read a couple really good ones, but here's a really interesting one. Some things we talked about. After his prayer, Rabbi Alexandri, he had the name Alexander in his name, right? Very Greek name. He said the following: may it be your will, Lord our God, that you station us in a lighted corner and not in a darkened corner. And let not our hearts become faint nor our eyes dim. Well, that's a really nice prayer, right? Keep us in the light, right? And don't let our hearts become faint or eyes dim. But some say that this was the prayer of Rav Hamnuna, and that was his prayer. And that after Rabbi Alexandri prayer, he actually would say the following: Master of the universe, right? Which is another phrase we use, Ribono Shel Olam. It is revealed and known before you that our will is to perform your will. And what prevents us? On the one hand, the yeast is in the dough. We have a Yetzer Hara. We have an evil inclination that is within every person. And the subjugation to the kingdoms is the other. May it be your will that you deliver us from their hands, the evil inclination and the foreign kingdoms, so that we may return to perform the edicts of your will with a perfect heart. And so what does he say, God? We know what we're supposed to do, right? We know we're supposed to do your will here on earth. But we got a couple problems. We have an internal monitor that doesn't always work. Our evil inclination is a part of who we are. And we also got another problem. We're living under the Romans. We're living in really, really bad times. And God, it would be really helpful if you keep both of those things down. Our external problems down and keep our internal problems down. Help us to not be victims of both, right? Keep us free from both of those things, the internal problems and the external problem. So that's an interesting prayer, which kind of recognizes that there are internal and external reasons for us not living up to our best selves. Help us, God, to figure out how to keep those things away from us. Now look at Rava's prayer. And we're going to read just a couple more, and we're going to wrap up. After his prayer, Rava said the following: My God, before I was created, I was worthless. And now that I have been created, it is as if I had not been created. I am no more significant, right? I am dust in life, and all the more so in my death. I am before you as a vessel filled with shame and humiliation. Therefore, may it be your will, Yehi Ratzon, Lord my God, that I will sin no more, and that those transgressions that I have committed, cleanse them in your abundant mercy. But may this cleansing not be by means of suffering and serious illness, but rather in a manner that I will be able to easily endure. And some say, right, this is the confession of Rabbi Hamnuna Zuti on Yom Kippur, right? This is a great prayer on Yom Kippur that people say, which is, I know I'm just a human being. I'm nothing. I'm dust. And I'm going to be even more dust when I'm gone. So now I have a little something. But it's also versions of this, yeah. Yeah. And so he says, I hope I can fix it, right? I hope I can be cleansed by you, right? I hope you can help me be free of those sins, get out of that problem that I'm in. And let's hope that it's being done not by suffering, not by having to come to it by, pain, but, let it come to me by my actions and by my thoughts and by my own courage, by my own direction, and not because I don't have a choice, because I have to pray to you, God, stop me from, suffering. Let me do it on my own will, by my own will, right? By my own control, not because I'm being beaten up by illness or misfortune and saying, oh, I really screwed up. Now I understand, God, why I need to get my act together. So this little prayer, the prayer of Mar, this one's a good one. And you know how I know it's good? Because it's part of our prayers. It's the way we actually end the Amidah. And this is where it comes from. The prayer of Mar, son of Ravina. He concluded the Amidah, and he concluded his prayer, and he said the following. What did he say? Elohai netzor leshoni merah. My God, guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking deceit. To those who curse, let my soul be silent, and may my soul be like dust to all. Open my heart to your Torah, and may my soul pursue your mitzvot. Save me from a bad mishap, from the evil inclination, from a bad woman, and from all evils that suddenly come upon the world. And all who plan evil against me, swiftly thwart their counsel and frustrate their plans. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart find favor before you, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. And of course, that part comes from Psalms. From Psalm 19. We just read that in Psalms. So he finished the prayer with a psalm. He opened it, of course, with a prayer asking God to help me keep my words good, keep my words from being bad, which of course is an interesting way of recognizing that our mouths get us into trouble. And what he also, though, goes on to say is, God, help me not have to react to people who are trying to destroy me, right? Frustrate those who are trying to do bad things to me, which to some extent is saying, God, look, I don't know how much I have control over those people who are trying to destroy me, who are trying to hurt me. But please, God, please do whatever I can't do, whatever's out of my control, please try to make it better. So my guess is, and what's interesting about this is that, this really reflects this really reflects people's feelings of what could happen what happens to people what happens to people in life with the people that they interact with. Look, I say that prayer all the time. At the end of the Amidah, I say that prayer. And sometimes I really do feel like, hey, I got people I know out there. I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but I have people out there that are, working against me. It doesn't happen a lot, but I've had people working against me. Not the doctors. I wish. But I've had people who I've really, really been, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to talk about it now because it's not relevant. But trust me when I tell you that, if you're going to do stuff in the community, you're going to make enemies. And, it's very easy to say, it's very easy to get focused on it and to say, I'm going to do everything I can to destroy that person. Well, you're asking God to take care of that. I'm not going to take care of it. God, you take care of it. Here's the way the prayer looks. I mean, this is the translation that we use, right? Guard my tongue from evil, right? And my lips from speaking falsehood, right? Help me to ignore those who slander me and be humble. Now, open my heart to your Torah, right? That part's there. Patakli be Torah, right? Frustrate the plans of those who would wish me ill, that I may praise your power, your holiness, and your law. Save your loved ones, right? And then Yehi Ratzon, right? And then we finish with those say Shalom. Now, I will say that we have cut out. Save me from a bad mishap, from the evil inclination, from a bad woman, from all the evil. So if you're wondering, did you miss something in the prayer? No. That part is not in, even in the most religious of versions of this. Those parts have been taken out. What? A bad woman? I think they're talking about a bad wife. Oh, I think this is a guy writing. Yes. Yeah, Mike, you don't have to worry about it. Oh, 100%. I think it's talking about a destructive person in their own home. So what do they say? A bad mishap, the bad inclination, bad woman, and from, other evils, right, that come upon us, right? And that is, we read a version of this already. Keep me from the bad stuff. So the Yetzer Hara is our own internal, we said, it's our own internal stuff, but it's also keeping us away from those external evils that can cause us damage. That's a beautiful, beautiful prayer, which again, that we've included in it. We're going to read, oh man, we're not going to get to all of them today. It's okay. Yeah. You know what? We'll get close, because this is really where it kind of ends. Is this whole part is in the? It's not, is it? No. Okay.
We were talking about Abraham's name.
Yeah. I didn't think this part was in there, but I wanted you to see it. So this technically is just in the Talmud. It's not in the Ein Yaakov. We're going to end there for today. Yehu Ratzoni Merifi, only be lefanecha, right? Right? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable before you, God, right? My rock and my redeemer. So we hope everyone goes to bed satiated, satisfied. That is really kind of the end of the blessings, because the next one isn't really a blessing. It is an interesting one. I'll just point it out again. It's not in there. It says, on Yom Kippur, when he fasted, he said, I'll just end with this kind of funny one. Master of the universe, it is revealed to you that when the temple was standing, right, one sins and offers a sacrifice. And although only its fat and blood were offered from that sacrifice on the altar, that atoned for them. So when we offered up stuff on the altar, it was fat and blood. Now, as I'm fasting, my fat and blood are diminished. May it be your will that my fat and blood that diminished from me, I offer as a sacrifice before you on the altar. May it find favor in your eyes. So God, I can't offer up animals on the sacrifice, but I am offering up the fat of my fast. And the part of my body that has been diminished is like a sacrifice. Anyways, we're going to go, folks. We're going to hope that everyone has a night filled with good dreams and that you go to sleep satisfied, free from the Yetzer Hara, free from any evil inclination, and free from any bad thoughts. Good dreams, everybody. Take care and good evening, everyone. And we'll see you in person at services on Friday night or somewhere else in the coming days. I won't be
Good
there. I will be
evening.
in
Thank
Boston.
you.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.